Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I thought I would start out the show this evening reading from one of Billy's early articles. This is called How It All Began, and it's the introduction to the contact reports. And I've talked about bits and pieces of this before, but I'm going to start a couple paragraphs down. Well, it happened during a mild night in May in the year 1941, and if I remember it rightly, it was around 3 a.m. in the night of Sunday, May 4th. In any case, this is how it has all been etched into my memory. Indeed, because everything which took place at that time was a special experience. I slept and dreamt that I saw my own body lying asleep in bed, thinking about it in my sleep. I made the observation that I really was asleep, which somehow amazed me and moved me to wake up deliberately. A little drowsy, I looked out the window through which I saw the clear, starry sky, so I arose from my bed and went to the window and climbed out, as it was almost at ground level. Outside, I sat down on the simple bench which stood against the wall of the house, which my father had built. I could not see the moon. However, the sky was clear and wrapped in velvety black, and millions of stars shone down from the firmament. For a few minutes, I sat there like that and looked up to the stars, while pondering and in my thoughts flying far into the universe. However, suddenly something peculiar happened inside of me, which from the next moment irrevocably changed my whole life. Strangely touched, I looked at my hands and my body and could only vaguely recognize them. So I touched my body and felt it, and then I heard my own voice say, "My life is made out of the love of creation." And I could not explain why I said that, and which power led me to speak these words. A slight shiver came over me, although the night was quite warm, and then I noticed that I also felt peculiar. Nevertheless, I was not frightened. Again, I looked up to the stars and recognized that the stars were distant suns in the vast outer space, and that these shone by means of their own power, by themselves, even though they were created from the light of the love of creation, as is everything in the whole universe. And again, words, the origins of which I could not decipher, the sense of which I was able, however, to grasp, as with the first words escaping from my lips. Everything is created out of the light of love. And then further words followed me. The space between the stars is empty, and yet not empty. And everything that exists in the whole universe is a living wizen. Everything is creation, and creation itself. The words which came from my mouth penetrated deeply into me, and in them I recognized that the true source of life is the light of the true creational love, which in its vitality creates all life and contains within itself all laws and recommendations of the creational order and all the information about life and death. Well, this is the most fantastic, one of the most fantastic articles Billy's ever written. It documents his early experience in 1941 when he was a very small boy growing up in Bulak, Switzerland. This was before he had any contacts, any extraterrestrial contacts at all. Billy, shortly thereafter, started to get telepathic messages from a man named Svath, an extraterrestrial human who was about 900 years old, who started to tell Billy about his former lives and started to tell him about what his mission on this earth was, and started to teach Billy about what the creation was and what the spiritual life is all about. So I thought it would be good just to read a bit of that to start the show out with, and that kind of gives us a good perspective on things. Billy was talking about the creation, the universal consciousness. The universe is creation's internal and external body. Everything in the universe that we see is part of the creation, but there is a spirit energy which exists in everything that is a kind of intelligence, and this intelligence is this universal consciousness. Schöpfung is the German word for creation, and the universe that we live in is the manifestation of the wisdom of creation. Everything that exists in the whole universe is a manifestation of the might and the infinite and true love of this universal consciousness. Love is the highest principle in all creation, and through that principle, everything exists in absolute logic. The physical structure of our universe is that we have 7 rotating belts. They counter-rotate. The 4th belt is where all the material in the physical universe is. And the incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. And this universe functions in what are called creational natural laws. The law of love refers to the highest form of love, which is effective love. The law of striving, which says every being has to continue to work and continue to evolve. Without striving, there is no life. The law of harmony teaches us to think correctly, to think in a neutral, positive way. Our universe is 46 trillion years old. It will continue to expand for 155.5 trillion years, and it will continue to create spirit forms. In order to evolve, the creation creates the human spirit form, and it is the spirit form in turn which evolves independently through the human being's material consciousness. And Billy has a book called The Decalogue. I've never read it. It's probably still in German. And it says some pretty profound things, which I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, I'll be honest. It says the creation is the being and the non-being of life. It is the most immense mass of spiritual energy in the universe. It is spirit in its purest form. It is immeasurable in its wisdom. And these concepts are talked about in a book called Genesis. Billy also has a book called Genesis. Another interesting German word that I've stumbled across is Schöpfung Geistenenergie, which is defined as the creation spirit energy, the creational spirit energy, which interweaves through the entire universe. The entire universe is laced with this energy, and it's an intelligence of its own. But the wording intelligence should not be likened to the intelligence of human beings, because this designation of intelligence, of this energy, it has the effect of bringing forth life forms, matter. Every spirit energy which is determined is used to enliven some sort of life form. Not only humans and not only animals, But this spirit energy is in the microbes, in the bacteria, in the viruses, in the rocks, in the sands, and in the water. Now, we as human beings have something called the human spirit, which resides in the middle of the brain in the area called the superior colliculus. It's the part of us that never dies. It survives the physical death. It's a piece of creation. It's completely invulnerable. It cannot be harmed by anything in the material world. Prior to entering the human being for the first time, a spirit form is an absolutely neutral energy agglomeration in timeless existence. And it's totally unknowing. It's a product of the creational idea. And the creation continues to create spirit forms for about 155.5 trillion years. And once the spirit form enters a human being, its goal is to collect wisdom, knowledge, love through countless reincarnations and to eventually merge with the creation so that the creation has the possibility to evolve farther. When the spirit form comes into the body of a child, it does it 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg. The spirit form is no larger than the head of a needle point. Its energy is enormous. It spreads throughout the whole body. When you die, the spirit energy stays in the body for about 3 to 4 hours. And that's why organs can be taken out of the body still and still used in another living body because of this. Because the residual spirit energy hasn't been absorbed by nature yet. Now, when you die, the spirit form takes your material consciousness out of the body and into the spirit realm, which is kind of a band of energy around our planet, but in a different dimension. And it takes the material consciousness, which is your conscious mind, your subconscious mind, your unconscious mind, your personality, and it is placed in an area called the overall consciousness block. And the overall consciousness block will process all the information from your previous life and condense it down into its essences. So everything you've learned about wisdom and love and logic and reasonableness and hope and humility and all these good things are stored in the essence, in the neutral positive essence in the spirit form. So your spirit form gains more power after every life and gains more intelligence. But it needs the material consciousness to evolve. It cannot continue to evolve without these countless reincarnations. So what is the consciousness? Now, the German word is Bewusstsein. The consciousness is the quality or state of being aware of an external object or something within oneself. It has been defined as sentience, awareness, subjectivity, the ability to experience, to feel, wakefulness, having a sense of self, execution of your control system of your mind. There's also something called Bewusstlosigkeit in the German. Sorry for the pronunciation. It's the unconsciousness. So the unconsciousness works as kind of a secretary for the conscious mind. It functions extremely quickly. The unconscious mind, for example, detects almost instantly when you've put your hand on a hot stove and you pull back. The conscious mind works slower. So its first processing goes into the unconscious mind. And then the unconscious mind says, okay, I can pass this on to the conscious mind, or I have to do something about this now. Or if it's very profound, it starts to communicate with the subconscious, with the deeper level kind of things. So as I said, the unconscious is kind of like a secretary or a clerical assistant. It comes before the consciousness in the chain of information processing. The unconscious deals with impulses, perceptions. It provides the pre-processing needed for the mind. And eventually, information is passed into other aspects of the material consciousness. This means that when, through the unconscious, instantaneous perceptions are made, the unconscious, in an imperceptible way for the human being, connects with the deeper leveled subconscious, if needed, to deal with more important or more profound things. So we have a material consciousness. It exists of the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, the subconscious mind, the personality. The material consciousness is the actual personality of the human being. It can be creative. It does inventions, notes, books. All this comes from material consciousness. The material consciousness is vulnerable. It can be harmed. You can have a nervous breakdown. The material consciousness is especially vulnerable to wrong thinking. And one of the most important things we need to learn is to be able to objectively evaluate our own thinking. Because if we get locked into these negative cycles of thoughts, we can create negative circumstances in our life, all through our own thinking. Negative thinking, unhealthy thinking, leads to a negative feelings. This is a way for you to detect when you're thinking your material consciousness is not thinking correctly. And then negative feelings lead to bad habits and bad circumstances. And then it comes back and affects the psyche again. Now, the psyche administers the thoughts and the feelings of the material consciousness. From the psyche comes the negative or the positive mood. Your inner attitude comes from the psyche. Quickly, a couple of other German words. There's a German word, empfinden, which is a spiritual process which slowly wakes up in a human being that eventually will allow him to sense the radiating love of creation, to sense kind of, I guess, that spirit energy. It comes from careful perception. Remember, the universal consciousness is called a Wesenheiten, which means that it doesn't have a personality. It doesn't have the ability to speed up or slow its own evolution. It expands for 155.5 trillion years, and then it goes into its contraction phase. So it's not a human being. It doesn't have a personality. It's not like a dog or a cat. The spirit energy of creation is a part of the stones and the gases and the water. So in a sense, they are a life form, in some ways more similar to the universal consciousness than a human being. Human beings are called Wesen in the German, which means that we have a personality, that we, through our own free will, affect our own evolution. These are all important terms to try to get your mind around and try to understand an important part of the spiritual life that we live. In Contact 544, we talk about the possible collapse of the United States in 2020. Billy in his great journey on the mothership. And if you haven't heard about that, I believe it's in Contact Report 31. Billy, right around somewhere between middle 1970, I think it was in 75, Semyase picked Billy up, and they went on a little tour of our solar system. And they went to Venus, to Mercury. They reorbited the Earth again and saw the Apollo-Soyuz hookup. When they were over Venus, there was some, not a whole lot of life, but there was some aspect of life on Venus. There were things going on Venus we couldn't talk about. But generally, our solar system has no life in it. They circled Mars. They orbited Mars. Mars has a very interesting story in terms of its history. There was a civilization on Mars. They did develop pyramids. They were advanced people. There was another planet in our solar system called Melona, which also had people on it. These people were kind of brought here from the Sirius system. And I've talked about it before that in our universe there are seven different dimensions, 7 different time-space configurations. So when I say the Sirius system, it's a Sirius system in a different space and time configuration that brought the people that were brought here were called the genetically manipulated people, and they were brought here with a more advanced people that were sometimes known as the benefactors. Anyway, some of the descendants of the people from Lyra Vega that had settled on the Sirius system were extremely advanced genetic engineers, and they have engineered out of themselves the will to fight. And they created a human race through their own genetic engineering that only lived about 100 to 120 years, that had a heightened aggression. And their goal was to have these people to do their fighting for them, and that they wanted to live in peace and not have to defend themselves anymore. They were disturbed because their forefathers, the Lyrians from Lyra Vega, were very warlike. Even though they had evolved to a tremendous level with technology, the people from Lyra had the technology to destroy whole planets and still were traveling around the universe, settling on different worlds, sometimes destroying entire peoples. But mostly, I think the people from Lyra Vega were somewhat reasonable. I mean, I wouldn't characterize them as these completely brutal savages, but in any sense, the people from the Sirius system in a different space-time configuration decided that their experiment was not successful. So they were going to do away with this race of people that they had created. And there were a group of quote-unquote benefactors on the Sirius system that decided that this wouldn't have been ethical to do, to just wipe out this whole race of people. So they brought them to our solar system, or some of them. They kind of escaped. And they settled on Melona, and they settled on Mars. Well, the people on Melona got out of hand. I mean, they were genetically engineered to fight. They started to fight among themselves. And eventually they harnessed the power of an ocean and sent it into a volcano for one reason or another, which caused their entire planet to explode. So before that great disaster, there were 3 planets in our solar system that had life. Eventually, because of that, the destruction of Melona, we got our inner asteroid belt, which I think is between Saturn and Jupiter. I'd have to double check that. Mars was also damaged by this. destruction of Melona. And eventually Mars lost all of its life as well, because something called the Destroyer Comet would come through our system about every 500 years. And it pulled Mars out of its rightful orbit. So Mars started a slow death spiral. It had already been pummeled by the asteroids, during the destruction of Melona. So some of the people got off of Mars, and they had to be, I think it's in Contact 251, it talks about they had to have some kind of alterations in order to live on Earth, some kind of genetic alteration to live on Earth. But a certain level of them did live here. Now, their corrupted genetics spread throughout the entire Earth. So we all now have the shortened lifespan of 100 to 120 years. We all also have the heightened aggression. That's why we continually war. That's why we have such violent sports. And this is one of the main reasons why other extraterrestrial groups kind of avoid us. In fact, someday, and probably in the near future, I think the Meyer material says our geneticists already probably know which gene to tweak to give us back our normal 1,000-year lifespans. So, in any sense, I started with the great trip Billy had. That's what I started talking about. Got off on the tangent of the history of our solar system, which even goes back even farther, because the people from Lyra Vega settled on the Earth about 389,000 years ago. And it's very interesting. They rediscovered the Earth, so to speak, because even farther back, millions of years ago, people from Lyra Vega came to the Earth and settled here for a short time. Some of them died here and entered into the reincarnational patterns. And the people from Lyra Vega were traveling in the tail of this destroyer comet I was talking about earlier, and they could see rubble from their own system that had been destroyed. Their own world had been completely wiped out and had to be rebuilt because of this destroyer comet, which, by the way, was bigger than the Earth, 1.7 times the size of the Earth. And according to our scientists, comets can't get that big, but they do. In any sense, the people from Lyra Vega were in the tail of this comet, following the comet, and it came into our solar system. And they saw the Earth, and they said, "Wow, this is an inhabitable planet. So let's stop here." And they were even more surprised, and I don't know what technology they used to do this, because the people here, they had some way to determine that their spirit forms, there were people here with spirit forms from Lyra Vega. It's a long story. What happened when they came back and settled again in 389,000 years ago is something I've talked about a little bit before. It has to do with certain rules and laws that were violated when the people from Lyra Vega interacted with the Earth peoples. Now, this is way, way back, 389,000 years ago. They abused the Earth people. They mated with the Earth people. And this was against their own rules. And other people from Lyra Vega came here and said, "Whoa, you guys have really done horrible stuff here. Your punishment is going to be to stay here on the Earth. In other words, we're going to strip you of all your technology, and you're going to enter into the reincarnational patterns of Earth. And there's going to be something drawn up." And the Meyer information talks about this. The term is leaving me at this moment, but there was a formal kind of agreement. I don't know what all the stories are. And there were certain people that were living their reincarnations. They were. It was called a codex. That's what it was called. And the spirit forms of these people from Lyra Vega, of course, were millions of years older than the native Earth humans, and their lives were supposed to be, quote unquote, supposed to be dedicated to helping straighten up the mess. And the people in Figu are some of these ancient spirit forms. Now, it's very interesting. The only individual that I know of that has been identified by name is Marian Eulinger in Switzerland as one of these very ancient spirit forms. Now, she's not officially part of Figu by her own choice, but she works with Billy almost every day. In any sense, I got off on a dramatic tangent there. That happens sometimes. I was talking about the Great Trip in 1975. That's how I got off on this whole history of the solar system. So what ended up happening in this trip in 1975 is Billy was taken in a beam ship with Semyase to Jupiter. And Billy got to see the Great Mothership. And the Great Mothership was almost like a planetoid. It was so large. Its height was higher than Mount Everest. Its width was incredible. I don't have the information fresh in my mind. There were over 100,000 people in the crew. Billy got to do some hyperleaps, some really amazing hyperleaps. Eventually, he got to travel to the very edge of our universe. And he got to meet and reunite with Asket. If you've ever heard me talk about Asket, Billy had 11 years of contacts with Asket. That was the last time he saw her in this great trip in 1975. But in Contact Report 544, it says that Billy was told on the great trip in 1975 that the superpower called USA could come to an end after 2020 if nothing in this country changes for the better by then. On the other hand, things are a little better. I'm hoping so. I mean, I thought we were going to war there when we sent those missiles to Syria. Let's hope that's not the case. The Meyer material talks about our $6 trillion debt. It talks about felonies of presidents and other people in our government. The binary star system in our solar system, we do have a binary star system. Don't worry, I don't think we really have anything to worry about in terms of Nibiru or anything coming back. But we do have a binary star system. Billy, on the Great Trip in 1975, he was permitted to see what's called the dark star. The dark star is our sister star, and the two stars counter-rotate around each other. The dark star is 1/10 the size of our sun. The dark star is having effects on what's called the Oort cloud, and the Oort cloud, at about 5,000 astronomical units from our sun to about 200,000 astronomical units, is a cloud of icy planetesimals. And this cloud is beyond Jupiter, beyond Uranus, in the region of Pluto and beyond. And outside of the Oort cloud is the dark star. It has its own set of planets. And it's affecting the Oort cloud. The Oort cloud has a disk. It's disc-shaped. In the inner Oort cloud, it's kind of disc-shaped. The outer Oort cloud is spherical. And what's happening somehow is this dark star is pulling meteors into the inner solar system. So anyway, the solar system is a binary star system. The twin of our sun is a so-called dark star. It's about 10 times smaller than our sun. It has its own planets orbiting around us. Billy's known about this since 1975. The two stars are about a light year distant from each other. So there's a very long chain of meteors that's being catapulted out of the Oort cloud into the inner solar system. So when you see these meteors that appear on YouTube and whatever, there was one I just saw today. I've forgotten about it already. But we saw meteors in Russia a couple years ago, some big ones. A big one in July of 2001 over an area of India. Well, I wanted to talk again about, I've been hitting these topics because I think they're very important. And I've talked about these topics before, but I think it's very important to clarify these and repeat some of these concepts. Artificial trans fats are created in industrial processes where hydrogen, I believe, is added to liquid vegetable oil to make it more solid. Now, unfortunately, these trans fats are extremely dangerous to human beings. They can cause your cholesterol levels to go up. They're found in biscuits, pastries, croissants, French fries, cakes, various chips and burgers. Very, very bad for you. Try to avoid those. It can cause your stomach to feel very bloated, very unhealthy, hard to digest. Some restaurants will double fry French fries. That's really, really bad. I talked about Agharta not long ago. Agharta is an inner realm. There are people that live within the earth. They have blue skin. The entrance to the inner earth area is in a place called Shigatse, which is a city in the region of Nepal. It's called the gateway to Mount Everest. And the people that live in the inner earth are called the sons of the sun. And they're a race of people. They have a tendency towards world domination, as do our secret societies. The Plejaren do not want to say anything else about this. Agharta is also mentioned in Contact Report 70 in conjunction with the inhabitants of Mu. So there was some connection between Mu and Agharta. You know, we have the people of Atlantis, the people of Mu, which I sometimes call Lemuria, and the inner earth people called Agharta, which is Agharta. Another interesting region of the earth during that time is called Hyperborea, and it's the northern Arctic. That's the north now. But during that time, the Arctic was a very warm place. It had a continual summer all the time with all kinds of fruit trees. It was actually the land region of Florida was at the North Pole. Now, I know that sounds insane, but when Atlantis and Lemuria had their great war and the asteroid was brought out of the asteroid belt, one of the pieces of the destroyed planet Malona was used like a weapon by the people from Mu. They attached a drive system to it, it's nuclear powered plus electromagnetic power, and they used it like a great weapon, and they aimed at Atlantis with it, and it came into our atmosphere with this horrific howling sound. It was terrifying, and the people of Atlantis at that time were celebrating their victory over the people of Mu because they had destroyed their city with these beam weapons. But they didn't celebrate very long because the asteroid exploded about something like 100 kilometers up. And this shower of meteors came on the Earth, and it was like thousands of atomic bombs being dropped on the Earth. And there were two gigantic fists, two portions of this asteroid that separated, and they slammed like titanic fists into the Atlantic Ocean. And there was a column of water which shot vertically from the Atlantic Ocean, from the heat of that asteroid and from the power of the impact. And it created a tremendous tidal wave, which just completely destroyed Atlantis. And by the way, Atlantis its capital was in the shape of a beam ship. Now, this happened about 12,000 years ago, and our society was brought back to a very primitive level, which allowed the Giza intelligences to come to the Earth to set up and to try to gain their worldly dominance over the people of the Earth. The people that we call the Giza intelligences today resided far below the Giza Plateau. And they had interactions with Hitler through a guy named Hermann Steinschneider, who went under the name of Erich Janssen during that time. And another aspect of this, besides the Thule Society, is the Holy See in Rome. The Holy See was involved with the Nazi regime. This is the Catholic Church, which cooperated with Hitler. And there was this collusion between Hitler and the Holy See, as well as the Thule Society. But the real influence on Hitler was through this Hermann Steinschneider, who was being manipulated by these Giza intelligences. And I think we'll cycle. Well, let me link that for now, if possible, because it's quite I'll have to go back and review my notes on Atlantis and Lemuria, and we'll do a whole show on that, because there was really two time periods of Atlantis and Lemuria. I don't have all the information. I'd like to get it all. I'm fortunate enough I have pretty much Contact 59 in its entirety on my website, a whole page devoted to it. And I have Lawrence Driscoll to thank for that, because he photocopied it from one of Colonel Wendell Stevens' books and sent it to me, and then Donna, my wife, changed that to text through some software, and then I converted it to HTML. So what happened 133,000 years ago, a man came here. His name was Atlant. He was obviously of Lyrian descent. He was kind of broad-shouldered and white-skinned, and his wife, Kariatide. They were both Ishwishes, called kings and or queen of wisdom. They brought with them thousands of people. Some of these people came from different star systems, I believe, but some came from the Pleiadian star system. I'll, again, have to review my notes about some of these details, but they settled on a landmass that was between the northeast American and South American continent. It was, I guess you would say, east of that, somewhere near the equator, and west of Europe and Africa. And there was at that time a great landmass there. And they started to build a great city. And it wasn't long before you saw the high rises of Atlantis, the beautiful architecture. There was a cousin that came here. It was a cousin of Atlantis' wife who came here, and he brought thousands of people with him, and they settled on the other side of the earth, in the place that we would call today the Gobi Desert, which is near China. And they built not only the city of Mu, but two underground cities, Agartha Alpha and Agharta Beta, which had an underground tunnel system. And the two cities lived in peace for thousands of years when some people came here from Beta Centauri. Now, this is Beta Centauri in a different space-time configuration, but Beta Centauri is hundreds of light years away. These people were led by a man named Eris the Barbarian, who was what they call a king of wisdom, but not a king of wisdom in the spiritual teachings, but in technical information. His leader, he had a sub-leader working under him named Semyasa. And Semyasa was in charge of these 200 sub-leaders. They were scientists. Semyasa was a scientist. And he ended up violating one of the rules of Eris, and he mated with an earth woman. The offspring was the person that we call Adam today. The original Adam was blonde-haired, 16 feet tall, what we would call a giant. And that was one of the interesting things, was there were also some genetic experiments done, but the offspring of these people from the stars, when they didn't mate with Earth peoples, were giants, and tremendous giants. You know, like some of them, I think my material says, were over 30 feet tall, maybe up to 39 feet tall, and they had tremendous appetites, and some of them were cannibalistic. That's kind of a whole another show just to talk about that. But there were actually, I talked about Semyasa, there were actually two Atlantis and Lemuria time periods too. So all of the complexities of this, I don't have all the complexities together yet, but Eris conquered Hyperborea. I was talking about Hyperborea earlier. And Arian, who was Eris' son, conquered India. And Eris was stirring up the trouble. He had kind of launched a group of emissaries into both Atlantis and Mu to get this war going on. And I'm not even sure why I went off on this huge tangent, all of these tangents tonight. But there was a lineage of people that were on the earth, which eventually became the Giza intelligences. The first was Eris the Barbarian, who I was just talking about. Eris' third-born son was a man named Jehave. Now, these people lived, the normal span for a human being is 1,000+ years. And these people had lifespans that were at least this long or longer. However, there was a lot of conflict, and often the the sons would kill the fathers, and it was just a horrific thing that was going on. Jihave was the third-born son of Eris. So Eris probably lived for thousands of years. I think Eris lived into his old age. And Jihave lived for about 340 years, and he was murdered by his firstborn son named Erisim. Now, Erisim was the one that created the Giza intelligence, which took them below the Great Pyramid. So this is kind of a long, convoluted story. It's very interesting, though. I mean, to understand how we've been influenced by off-world humans, at least to me, is, I think, extremely interesting. And these people, and I'll get to this in a minute. I wanted to talk about another person named Ashtar Sharon and how he fits into this whole story, trying to put this all together myself. But anyway, Erisim, he was exiled by Ptah and Solemn after Ptah and Solemn were his brothers. After he murdered his father and tried to take over, there was this conflict between Ptah, Solemn, and Erisim. Erisim was exiled for a while, but he came back, and he settled far below the Giza Plateau in these old cubicle constructions, which are about 73,000 years old. And he started this group of many thousands of individuals who sometimes were called the Celestial Sons. Some of these branched off away from Erisim. They didn't become the Giza intelligences. They went their own way. But part of the group was the Giza intelligences, and their goal was to make all of the Earth life forms subordinate. So Erisim, through his emissaries, started to spread these false teachings. And his goal was to use these lies and deceit for misleading Earth peoples through the use of cultic religions. And these cultic religions caught on big time in the middle, near Mediterranean and near the Nile. It was very skillfully the way Erisim taught this information. And so some of the Earth humans succumbed to this false teaching. Anyway, it was a mutineer called Hen who threw Erisim into power, and he was known as Jehovah to the Hebrews, or the Hebrons, as the Maya material refers to them. He's also the God of the Old Testament. I know that would be blasphemy. But this is the story, the very interesting story that the Maya material presents. I always let people decide on their own what they think of this. I want to read a little bit of something about Ashtar Sharon because he was involved with this group. This time I will give you explanations that Semyase had spoken about with you in relation to the events surrounding Ashtar Sharon, who in truth was named Arisek, and who carries further names yet. The course of evolution belongs to the high and highest forms of life, just as it does to the lowest of life forms. Arisek, alias Ashtar Sharon, and so forth, as far as the fulfillment of the apportioned mission is concerned, he was the leader of an assembly of intelligence consisting of thousands of individuals who, until 15 years ago, stood under the direct force command of the world control-seeking Kamagal. This was two of the later leaders of the Giza intelligence, Kamigawa first, Kamigawa second. It's interesting, and just one of the things I wanted to bring up was the Erisame, or Ashtar, Sharon, and Kamigal were cousins, which I thought was a very interesting thing. Anyway, I've got off on some humongous tangents on today for whatever reason. Occasionally I do that. And I want to thank all of you that listened to this episode. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great evening. Good night.